So today we will be discussing some tools and processes surrounding the topic of communication. And when it comes to communicating with volunteers, there are really kind of three different avenues that should be on your radar: static messaging, manual messaging, and automated messaging. And in CERVIS, these three avenues are split across different parts of the system as you're engaging with volunteers, and even as they're engaging on their own. So we're going to start off with more of the static side of things, for example, what kind of content is displayed on different pages throughout the system. So in particular, let's step back a moment and look at this from the volunteer's perspective. If we look at something like your event listing page, which is where your opportunities get posted, well, there's a welcome message at the top of this page. This page has a title. This is all kind of static messaging in a way that you can communicate with your volunteers. And in CERVIS, these types of messages and these types of welcome messages are malleable. You can edit them in the system configuration. So this is one example of this, but there are many more. So let's go ahead and move back over to the admin side, and we'll take a look at where you can edit this information. So this is found in the system configuration under system management. If we go into edit system configuration, there's a section in here called page content. And in this section, you'll see lots of different messages. You can see the first example here is the welcome message that we just looked at on the event listing page. So in here, you can edit the heading for that page, essentially the title, and then also the welcome message itself. Now, if you've never been in here, if you've never changed to this, it's probably filled with kind of our boilerplate default text, and you are more than welcome, obviously, to edit this. This is one of the first things your volunteers will see when they're working in your system. So this is a really good thing to consider. If you've never taken a look at it, just read through it, make sure it lines up with how you want to communicate. If there's any special instructions or information you want to pass along to volunteers, you can do that through here. So these aren't things you're going to be editing all the time, but certainly something that's worth considering. I do want to point out a couple things in here. As you're editing this text, you have a lot of options in terms of making changes to the way that it looks, adding formatting, inserting links, inserting images. You can even edit the HTML directly if you need to do something more specific in there using the source code option. And then I also want to point out there's a preview icon here, and you'll see this next to really all of these fields, that allows you to view what this message looks like in situ. It's not a perfect representation, it's an image, but it shows you kind of the example and where this page is and kind of what we're talking about in this context. So this first message here, this event listing page, this is really the primary one that I would focus on, but there are several others in here that are important to check up on. I want to point out there's a service project listing page. You may not be aware there are two separate versions of that page if you would like to display your events and service projects separately. By default, they are merged into one page, so you generally don't need to make changes to the service project page. Otherwise, below that, we have the volunteer application page. This is the standalone application. If you just have volunteers create a new account without registering for opportunities, that's what this page is for. There's also a submission message. There's the profile creation page. This is when someone is creating a new account as a part of the registration process. So when someone types in their name and email and the system says, you don't have a profile, and asks them to make a new account, this is the text at the top of that page. So this might be a good place to communicate with new volunteers as well. Again, considering that it's static info, it's not going to land in their inbox. So there are a few other pages like this that you may or may not be using, but it's a good idea to kind of glance through here. If you have any questions as you're looking through this, of course, always feel free to use our customer support tool. And as we're going through this webinar today, please feel free to ping those questions across as well. Okay, so this really is kind of like a static form of messaging. Again, it's not something that you're editing all the time. It's good to be aware of it, and it's good to make sure that it lines up with how you want to communicate, but it's not something you're making changes to all the time. There's one other kind of format of that type of static messaging that I want to make sure to highlight It's something that we kind of touch on quite a bit in these webinars, and that would be the description sections for your events. And when someone is looking at an opportunity, this description section really is the bulk of communication in terms of what should people expect to bring and what should they expect to wear and what will they be doing and who are they going to be with. Are they inside or outside, standing or sitting, right? All that kind of information. You can convey that data through an image as well, and I would certainly encourage you to do that. But this description section carries a lot of that weight. So it's good to make sure that this kind of lines up with how you want to communicate as well. I often encourage or recommend creating yourself a template. So maybe you create, different section headers and you make these, bold and larger text, maybe change the color or something. You make several of these types of headers, and then you can save yourself field content here. You can basically save a template, and you could just call this like your generic description. And then every time you create a new event, if you're not duplicating an event, you don't have to start from scratch. You can load that field content and that will pull that back in, and then you can go from there. That way all of your events kind of have the same scheme and they all look basically the same. Okay, so this is kind of, again, more of that static messaging. Now, this is obviously a very important part of how you communicate with volunteers, but it's probably not traditionally what you might think about when the topic of communication tools is on the docket. What you probably thought more about is emailing, and we're going to move into that next. So in CERVIS, emailing touches on both that manual side of communication as well as the automatic side. Let's start off with manual messaging. So if you want to communicate with a fixed set of volunteers, well, then you can select those people and send them an email. There's a bunch of different ways to get into searching for volunteers or identifying the set of individuals you want to communicate with. So let's talk about that first. That's a very important aspect of communicating with volunteers. A very simple example, you probably want to email your entire volunteer database every once in a while with some important information or important news. If we go into the volunteer database, so go under volunteer management, click on search and manage volunteer database. From here, we can leave the search field blank at the top of the page, click search volunteer database. That'll show you everyone in the system. We can select those results, use the drop-down menu up at the top where it says volunteer management bulk actions, and then we can select send email to selected volunteers, and then click to send an email. All right, in this case, I'm emailing the entire volunteer database. Maybe I want to send out a big update or some important news or just a generic newsletter that I want to send to all my volunteers. Now, a very important aspect when you're emailing from this side of the database, so what I mean by that is from the volunteer management portal, the system will automatically exclude any person who is inactive, has previously unsubscribed from this type of message, or has a failed email address, or of course has no email address. So anyone that kind of falls under any of those avenues will automatically be excluded. You might be thinking, well, I don't want to email my whole database. I don't want to email all the inactive volunteers, or I don't want to email the people that have unsubscribed. And you don't need to worry about that. The system already excludes those people. We can see some examples here. There's a failed email address, an unsubscribed email address. If we wanted to, actually, let's just go ahead and mark this person as inactive. So if we mark this person as inactive, which CERVIS never does this automatically, you might want to do this on kind of like an annual basis. Go through and identify inactive volunteers. If you want to learn more about that, we talk about that usually end of year. In December, we did a webinar on refreshing your database, and we ran through kind of how to identify inactive volunteers. But if we have, selected some people here, so a failed email address, an unsubscribed email address, an inactive volunteer, and then we'll select somebody who has kind of like a normal status. If we're going to email these 4 people, so I use the drop-down menu here, select send email. When I go to actually send the email, you will see that the only person actually receiving this email is Benjamin. So if I click on send email now, you can see the recipients listed here is just Benjamin because everybody else was excluded from this email for one reason or another. So that's something to kind of keep in mind. You don't need to try to identify only your active volunteers who have subscribed. Now you can do that, But the system will automatically exclude those people who shouldn't be getting this message. Okay, now we started with this idea, okay, I want to email my entire volunteer database, right? But perhaps I don't want to email the whole database. Maybe I only want to email a subset of people. Maybe I want to email people based on what they're interested in or what skills they might have or what languages they can speak, right? I can go into the advanced volunteer search, which we can get to from a couple different places. From the main dashboard, we can go directly into advanced volunteer search. If we're already on this page, you can go into the advanced search under advanced options. And this contains a whole slew of options pertaining to your volunteers. Basically, everything that you are tracking about your volunteers is searchable, with the exception of sensitive data fields. There's a set of custom data fields that are sensitive. But apart from that, everything else is searchable. And we can go through here and we can search for volunteers based on how old their account is, if they haven't had account activity in a certain time frame, what are they interested in, what skills do they have listed. You can search by address or age or gender or email address or phone number. You can search by participation options. So show me everybody who served more than 0 times last year, right? We can do all kinds of different searches through here. You can get really creative. You can do very specific searches because you can go and run a search, and then you can go back into the advanced search, and you can at the bottom say, let's combine my results of this pending search, so what I'm about to do, with my previous search. Basically, search within my last results. So you can get very specific searches in here if you're looking for specific sets of volunteers. Now, generally, if we're talking about communication, it might just be something like, I want to email all the people who live in this area, or I want to email all the people who have this skill set, or said they're generally available on Fridays, right? So you can go and find those sets, you go and run that search, and then take those results, and then go and send an email. All right, so this is a very common way to find a set of volunteers and communicate with them, is just by running an advanced volunteer search. Now, sometimes the reason or the impetus for your communication might be that you have a weather delay, or you're expecting inclement weather and we want to just notify people, or we've had to shift the times of certain things. And that generally has more to do with what people are actually registered for. Now, there is a tool in the advanced volunteer search to find volunteers based on which specific events they've participated in, and you can apply date ranges to that. So you can usually accomplish exactly what you're looking for through here. But if we're talking about registrations and trying to find people who are signed up for certain events or on a certain day, that's typically a little easier to accomplish through the opportunity database. If we go over to search and manage existing opportunities, from here, we can run a search for a certain set of events, or the default view here is all of your open events, so things that are upcoming. If we take the example of like a weather delay, we're expecting bad weather tomorrow, then what I can do is just select all of my open events. And then in the drop down here at the top, so kind of like on the volunteer side, we have this management or bulk actions section. So we can click into that and we can say, let's email all these registered volunteers. And we can actually pick a date. So we can say, email all the registered volunteers for tomorrow, or for today, or for a particular date. So you can choose a certain date here. When you go to send an email here, then it's going to basically run a query. Everyone who's registered for an event tomorrow, I want to email those individuals. So this query, I should be very clear, is specifically applied to time slot events, because those could be across multiple dates, right? If you're talking about normal events or service projects, that might apply in this scenario, but you'd want to be more specific about what you're selecting if you don't want to include those people. So just be aware of that. Now, another very important thing to keep in mind when you are emailing from this part of the database, so from the opportunity side, this side does not necessarily care if a volunteer is active or inactive, or if they've unsubscribed from emails, because generally speaking, if you're emailing based on who's registered for a certain date, right? We take this weather closure as an example. I need to notify everyone whether or not they've unsubscribed from emails, because we are going to be closed. So these are generally considered more kind of pertinent communication, and they're going to pierce through that unsubscribed status or that active versus inactive dichotomy. So you'll want to make sure to keep that in mind. If you have something that you need to make sure gets to people, If you can go through the opportunity database side, especially if it's something like what we've been talking about in this case. Okay, now when we do get into sending an email, so if we go ahead and click send email here, there's a few important things to note. Up at the top, there is a sent from address. By default, this is going to be something at a service tech address. It might be kind of familiar to you. It might have your domain and then say at servicetech.com or something like that. This is malleable. If you would like to change this, you can notify our customer support team and you can change your sent from address. That won't really have any bearing on deliverability. We do a lot of work to maintain email reputation, so you shouldn't have a lot of issues with that either way. But if you'd like to change what this address says, either keeping it at a service tech domain or changing it to your own domain, maybe your own volunteer at address, you certainly can do that. Just let our customer support team know. Let them know what you'd like to change it to. If it's something within your domain, it will require a little bit of work on your end to basically give us permission to send emails from your domain. So that's the sent from address. Below that is a reply address. You'll notice this is different. When I'm sending an email, I get the replies. So when you send an email, you get replies. So if a volunteer hits reply to that email, it's going to come back to you. You can change this to someone else on staff. So if you're sending emails on behalf of someone else and you want them to get the replies, you can change that, but it will always default to you. And the system will also always default to BCC, so blind carbon copy. Volunteers won't see who else received the message. They'll just see that it was sent to them, and they'll see, the sent from address and the reply address. You can change this to direct to if it's like this case of a special event and you want everyone else to know who else is there and maybe let them reply all so that everybody else can respond. You can do that, but the default is always BCC. Now our recipients are listed here. Service knows who all of these people are because they were registered for the event. That's going to be important in a second when we talk about a first name variable. If you need to add anyone else in, you can look for them through here. If they have an account in the system, you can search for them by name, click on them and add them in, or you can just write in an email address through here as well, or copy and paste emails in. If you use a comma, you can separate out a list and add more people in to send the email. This isn't generally how I would add people to an email, but it is kind of like a last resort if you do need to write some names in. Again, going back to that first name variable, which we'll talk about more in a second. If you write in an email here, Service doesn't know who this person is. So usually I would try to search for people. That way it knows who they are. And then, of course, the rest is just composing the message, right? We have a subject and a body. The message body has your logo at the top. If you'd like to change that, let our customer support team know. And then below that is the message body itself, right? And I've alluded to it a couple times now, but you can use a first name variable when you're writing an email. So you can see if I hover over this info icon above the message body, it says variables, first name, and it has pound, F name, pound. So you basically just write that in directly as we see it. And then this gets replaced with the volunteer's name. Now, if you are emailing, let's say a family, and they all have the same email address listed, it's not going to send 5 copies of the email to that family. It's going to send 1 copy, and it'll change this first name variable to represent all 5 of those people. And in case you care, it does use an Oxford comma between the penultimate and ultimate in the list. Okay, apart from that, there's a few other things to note when you're creating emails, right? You have the same sort of options for managing the way that your message looks and how you format things, kind of like what we saw when we were editing some of those static messages. There's also a preview option here if you want to see kind of more what this looks like as a larger standalone page. And then down at the bottom, actually, sorry, before we get to that, I also want to point out there's an HTML option that's source code, so same as what we saw before, but you might already have crafted sort of like a newsletter that you already have the HTML for that. You can copy and paste that in here. So you can certainly overwrite the existing default here and create your own sort of newsletter format. And then down at the bottom, you can save templates. So if you send the same or a similar email regularly, I would go ahead and make a template based on that. You can give it a title, make it private or shared. Private means only administrators and the person who made the template can use it. Shared would mean that all of your staff can use it. Obviously not volunteers, but any person who has permission to send emails. And then, of course, there's options here for loading a template. So if you want to pull, an existing template, you can grab that through here, and then you can load that up. There's also an option to replace a template. So right here, obviously we can see, that's not actually the first name variable. So if we change that out, I can go in and replace template, and then I can essentially just overwrite the existing template. There's another option at the very end to delete templates. Administrators can remove templates from the system as needed. There's no cap to how many can be in here, but obviously there comes a point where there's too many, and it's not all that useful to have so many, especially if they have similar names. Now you might have noticed it says automatically saving draft. Every 30 seconds, the system will save a draft of what you're working on. You can also manually save a draft at any time. The leftmost icon here allows you to save a draft. You can click on that. It says draft message successfully saved. This does not save the recipients. It only saves the content of the message. So if we had to step away from our desk, this would get stored. It would get saved, and then we could come back to it. We would just need to run our search again, however we got to sending this email. Perhaps you're writing an email and you realize, actually, I want this to go to a wider audience. Well, you can just save a draft and back out. And let's say I want to send this to my whole database now. I can go back to the volunteer database, search for everyone, select everyone, and then go to send an email. And then it will ask me if I want to load that draft. So this will persist until I choose to either load the draft and send it or discard it. So if we do load that up, then we have a couple options as far as sending. But before we get to that, there's one last thing, and that's attachments. You can add file attachments to your events or your emails through here. These attachments aren't traditional attachments you might expect to see. They actually show up at the bottom of the message with a little paperclip icon. So I would generally allude to that in the email itself. But the benefit of that is we can actually track how many people clicked on those attachments, so you can get some metrics off of that information. You can attach different file attachments through here. And then at the bottom, we can either send this message immediately or we can schedule delivery. If we schedule delivery, we can pick a date anywhere up to 30 days out. And then we can go and choose what time to have it sent as well. So if you want to send something on a weekend or on a holiday, you can just schedule it to be sent out. So if we pick something here, click schedule email, we'll get a little notification. And then where this lives until it is sent is in the system log. So if we back up on the main dashboard under system management, there's a tool called system log. So view system log. And if we click into this, you can see kind of all of the actions that have taken place in your console. My demo console is a little bit funky, but yours will show basically everything for the last calendar year. So one full year. And you'll see people logging in, registering for events, all kinds of information in here. But obviously this scheduled email is also showing up. So we can see that here. If you scheduled an email a while ago and it kind of got buried, you can search for that. You can search the system log up at the top using whatever kind of term you want to. So we could search by the term scheduled if we wanted to. There's also a quick search for sent email messages, which includes scheduled emails. And if we click on the left-hand side, this view scheduled message option. This allows you to actually see the message. So we can see who the recipients are. We can see when it's scheduled to go out, who set it up. We can also see the full content. If we take a look at this and realize, we neglected something or we left something off, we can, at the bottom, copy this message as a new draft. And then we could actually delete this scheduled email. So we could cancel that before it goes out. Obviously, you'd want to copy the message first like we did. Then we can click on delete scheduled email. That'll remove that scheduled email. It still notes that we were going to send it. But now we can go back and edit that draft and, before we send it out again. Okay, so generally that's kind of the idea of manually messaging volunteers. There's one other component to emailing in Service, and that would be automated messages. Before we get into all the automated messages, I did want to mention because I talked about some of the metrics in terms of who received messages and that sort of stuff. I mentioned that, but let's actually take a look at that now. When you send an email through Service, it gets stored in the system log like we saw. If we look at a message that was already sent through here, as opposed to a scheduled email, at the top of this, we can see some analytics. So we see the number of recipients, we see how many people opened the email, opened attachments, unsubscribed, and failed. You should always take this open rate with a grain of salt. A lot of those get marked automatically as opened, whether or not the volunteer did actually open the email, just kind of in the name of privacy. So this number will always be inflated, but that attachment views is a good option for kind of understanding how many people actually clicked on the attachment. So that can be a helpful number to have as well. So this is written at the top of emails when you go and look at them in the system log, but you will also be able to see them on a volunteer's profile. If we go into the volunteer database and we look at a volunteer's account, so if we just click into view profile details for an individual and scroll kind of halfway through, we'll see a section for email message history, and we get that same option to view the email message here. These are manually sent messages. We will not see automated messages popping up in here, but that means we can get those metrics and see like how many people opened it or clicked through an attachment. All those numbers will be in here as well. And then one final place where you can see that is in a report. So if we go from the main dashboard under volunteer management to report management, there is a report in here specifically for email analytics. It uses the date range at the top of the page and it shows you what emails were sent in that time frame and basically how did they do. You'll get the numbers like the read rates, you'll get percentages. So you can kind of see all of those numbers in one place for a given date range. Okay, so let's switch gears and talk more about some of the automated messages in Service. And there's a few different places where automated messages can show up for your volunteers, as well as for your staff. And one of the first things to consider is a new volunteer. When a new volunteer creates a profile, who gets notified? And the answer is, it depends. You could have your staff notified, and you could have the volunteer themselves notified. If we go into the system configuration under system management, there's two things I want to draw your attention to. First, under system settings, there's an option in here to auto-assign a follow-up for new volunteers, one person to whom that gets assigned. This would be a staff member. And then also a choice to send a follow-up email in conjunction with that. So if you want to be emailed every time a new volunteer creates an account, that's what this configuration would do. Say yes to both of these options and set yourself as the contact here. Now, from the volunteer's perspective, they might get a confirmation email when they create a profile, or they might get a verification email. And that depends on if you allow volunteers to create their own passwords initially. So in the security and privacy section, there's an option to allow volunteers to create their password when they're initially creating their account. This defaults to no. So if you have not changed this, this should say no, and your volunteers are instead getting like a welcome email. If you want volunteers to make their own password initially, you can set this to yes, but that will send an activation email. So when someone creates a new account, they'll get an email that says, thanks for making a profile, click here to confirm. Kind of a standard email. That's basically verifying that they own that email address. Now, if we jump ahead, there's a section called email message content, and this contains a lot of the automated messaging in Service, but the one I want to take a look at right now is if we jump down a bit, there's one called Profile Creation Confirmation Message. So if you would like a volunteer to get like a welcome email when they create a new profile, that's kind of how I would frame this or how I would think about this email. This is sending out as soon as someone creates a new account. You can see that there are two variables in use here. We have a first name variable and a temporary password. Both of those are in this information box. Wherever variables are applicable in Service, they'll be listed in the information box next to that particular field. So you can see kind of the default use case for this email is giving people a temporary password. Again, it's basically confirming that they own this email address and they can use that the next time they log in. Then they'll make their permanent password. But you could also edit this and have a lot more information as like a welcome email. Like, hey, here are the next steps. Here's what we're going to do. Here's what you can do. If you want that kind of information relayed to volunteers, as soon as they create a new profile, this is a very good place to do that. So this is one place for automated messaging when someone creates a new account. The next kind of more important place for automated messaging, not more important, just very important, is when someone registers for an opportunity. So all the communication around a particular event or a volunteer's registration. So there are a couple components to this, notifying your volunteer and also notifying your staff. So let's take a look at an opportunity. When you create an opportunity in CERVIS, you'll notice there's no option in here for a confirmation email. Your volunteers will receive a confirmation email when they register themselves for an event. If you are registering volunteers on the back end, they're not necessarily being notified of that. You can choose to send a confirmation message, but that's a choice. When volunteers register themselves, they do get a confirmation email. Whether or not they get a reminder email is up to you. The reminder emails are very, very similar. They have different intro messages. We'll look at those in a second. But they're basically just sent on whatever schedule you'd like. So maybe 1 day before the event, maybe 7 days before the event. There are 2 automatic reminder emails that can be set up. They are both the same content. You would just choose the schedule to send those. Now your staff can also be notified of registrations. They can be notified of cancellations, and they can also be reminded of events that are upcoming. So if we look under the additional organizer options, when you're creating an event, you'll see there's options in here to notify organizers of registrations, notify organizers of cancellations, and then also send a reminder email to your organizers. If you have a staff member, or perhaps you yourself would like to be notified, let's say once a week, of all the events that are upcoming, you could schedule this email to go out on like a Sunday or a Monday, and then it will go once per week, and it will show you all of the events that are upcoming that week. So this can be like a nice roll-up email. Some people like to do this 1 day prior. So this will show you all the shifts that are happening tomorrow. So you'll get 1 email per day and show you all the events that are happening, and you can download rosters through there. So this might be a nice reminder for certain staff members. Now, from the volunteer side of things, they're getting a confirmation message, they're getting a reminder message. The vast majority of those emails is based on whatever the event is that they're registering for. All the data about that event, the description section, the title, the location, the point of contact, driving instructions. Do you have mobile sign-in turned on? That might be included as well. So it's mostly based on the event itself. But there is an intro paragraph which you can edit in the system configuration in that email message content section. And you can see the first item in here is the event registration confirmation email. So when a volunteer registers for an event, this is the email they're getting. This is just the intro to that email. If we look at the preview icon here, you can see it has the volunteer's first name, has that intro paragraph, but the rest of the data in here, again, is based on the event. That's kind of the vast majority of the information. There's one component of this that I want to make sure to point out that's not obvious right away, and that's this additional information section. If you have some data for your events that you do not want volunteers to know until after they are registered, for example, you might have parking pass information or a gate code or things like that that volunteers really shouldn't know or the general public shouldn't know until they are registered. This additional information section is a good place to put that because volunteers cannot see it until they have registered for the event, and then they see it in this confirmation email, and they would also see it in the reminder email. If we jump ahead here a bit, there's the event registration reminder email, and this also contains that same data. So this is a section in every opportunity. When you go to create an event in the system, under advanced options, so we have to keep scrolling down here. Under advanced options, there's this additional info for the confirmation or reminder message. That would be what this blurb is. Okay, there's one more kind of automated message that I want to make sure to point out, and that would be when you have an event set up to require approval. So you're manually approving volunteers for an event. When volunteers apply for this, they'll get a pending notice. They get an email basically that says that you've received their application. They're not yet registered. They need to wait for a confirmation from you. This is a pretty particular use case, but I did want to point this out. So if you have your events set up so that you have to approve every single registration, that's essentially what this is doing. Okay, there's a lot of data in here, obviously. So if you have questions pertaining to emails, some of the different automated messages, some of the messages in the system configuration, of course, continue to write those in. We are happy to answer those and address those. But we're going to switch gears here to another form of communication, which would be texting. Now in Service, texting is an additional add-on. It's optional. You don't necessarily have to use it. If you would like to, the best place to start is by clicking on this Need Help button, search for SMS or texting, and you'll see an article that talks about how to enable and configure SMS or text messaging. This article talks about the annual fee associated with texting through Service, and then also specifically setting up an account with Twilio. Twilio has ongoing fees associated with like messages sent and that sort of thing. But this has the complete instructions on how to create an account. Setting up an account with Twilio is free. If you are a nonprofit, you should definitely go through the twilio.org/benefits link first, because they offer discounts and free messaging for those who apply, or for those who are eligible. But basically, this article just walks through setting up texting. If you want to get started with this is a good place to begin, but you can also just contact our customer support team and ask about setting up texting. Again, there is a fee associated with that. But once texting is enabled in the system, you will see it kind of reflecting what we saw with emailing. You can do manual messaging and you can do some automated messaging. So let's just briefly run through that. Same kind of rules apply for what we talked about, running searches and identifying sets of volunteers and all that sort of thing. But in the volunteer database, we can go in and select a set of people, and then the drop down here, we can say, let's send a text message, right? Very, very similar kind of workflow. We can do the same thing on the opportunity side. So again, we have a weather cancellation tomorrow. I want to text everyone who's registered for an event tomorrow. We can do that through here. Obviously, there's a different kind of urgency associated with texting versus emailing. And depending on your volunteer base, one over the other might be more effective. When you are texting through Service, you will see kind of looks similar to emailing, but obviously it has a max character message amount. But then in here, you can set up templates, kind of like we did with emailing. And then you can also identify what texts were sent to what people. We get the same sort of messaging center in the volunteer's profile. If we go to view profile details for an individual, and we scroll down underneath email message history, we can see a text message history as well. Now you can set up replies as well through that SMS configuration, where you would get an email when someone replies to a text message. You can even have it sent to a few different people on staff if you'd like to. And that will tell you who the system thinks sent that text based on phone numbers associated with that, or accounts associated with that phone number. And then you can actually reply to that message to text that person back. So that can be a pretty convenient way to interact with volunteers if you know that their preferred format for communication is texting. So again, manual messaging, relatively similar to the email side of things. And then for automated messaging, it's really relegated to automatic reminder text messages. So when we create an opportunity, if texting is enabled, you'll see an option in here to send an automatic reminder SMS. It's the same exact sort of scheme. You pick what time frame, and then that will send a text message that many days before that shift. The text message, of course, is shorter than the reminder email, but it contains all the pertinent info about the event, everything that the volunteer might need to know. Okay, that's pretty much it for texting. If you do have more questions about that, again, don't hesitate to ask. You can use that Need Help button to contact our customer support team directly. Now, there are two other formats for messaging that I want to quickly run through. None of these are nearly as robust as emailing. That's kind of the biggest chunk of it, obviously. But I do want to make sure to talk about a couple other options for you. One is file attachments or file downloads, posting documents, or letting volunteers even upload their own documents. So in Service, there is a section under the System Management heading for file management. It's kind of like a general document management. You can add documents in here, and then you can grab links to those and send those to people as basically a downloadable link. But you can also post documents. If we post a document by clicking on that kind of signpost icon, you can see that one now says posted. Now, when volunteers go into their profile, there will be a section called View Posted Documents. And then in here, they can go and view whatever document you've posted and download that themselves. So if you have some resources or some documentation that you want to make available to volunteers, you can use that posted documents kind of option. Now, there are several different places and ways to do this. What I showed is from the main dashboard, file management. This is global. Everyone in the system would have access to documents you post through here. But you can also attach documents to individual volunteer profiles and then post them. Or you can post documents to groups, and then every member of that group would have access to that document. So it's kind of relegated to that set. Or you can add attachments to events. If you add an attachment to an event, you can likewise post that document, and then any person who's registered for this event will have access to download this. So I gave the example earlier of parking passes, things like that. This can be a good way to do that. One other thing with events in particular, if you post a document on an event, then it will automatically be attached to the confirmation and the reminder emails. So again, parking pass is a kind of good example of this. If you have a printout that you need volunteers to get after they register, you can attach it through here, post it to the event, and then any person who registers, it'll be attached to the confirmation email and attached to the reminder email. And of course, it'll show up in that posted documents section for them as well. One other component of documents like this is that you can allow volunteers to upload their own file attachments if you would like to. This is a setting in the system configuration. If this is enabled, volunteers basically can drop documents in. After they drop it, they don't really have access to it anymore. You can post it again for them so they can download it, but they can't remove it. It's kind of relegated to your end of the system. If you'd like to, that setting is in the system configuration. Under security and privacy settings, there's an option in here that says allow file attachment uploads. We can say yes or yes admin only. That means that when a volunteer uploads an attachment, it is only available to administrators and not your leadership team. Or of course you can leave that off. If you'd like to, you can also be notified every time someone uploads a file attachment. But what I prefer to do generally is actually just to search by that. In the advanced volunteer search, there is an option to search by file attachments. And you can find people who had a file attachment added to their profile within a certain time frame. Okay, one final component to kind of communication and the different tools available in Service. This kind of goes a little bit more back towards the static side of things. But this would be the idea of having pop-up messaging. So in Service, there are a few different ways to have pop-up messages appear for your volunteers as well as for your staff. The biggest one is in the system configuration. Under page content, at the very bottom of this section, well, not the very bottom, but kind of towards the bottom is the system information message. This is a pop-up message. This can be turned on for all logins, normal logins only, which would be volunteers, or privileged logins only, which would be staff. So if you want to remind your staff, hey, when you are creating events, please don't forget to do this, right? You could have a privileged login only pop-up. You can write up your message through here, and then whenever a volunteer or whenever a staff member logs in, they'll see a pop-up like this, and they have to click close message before they can proceed. So again, this can be used internally for your staff, or it can be used for volunteers. So if you want to have some kind of notice, like, hey, don't forget we have this thing upcoming, or whatever. This is a pop-up message that shows up when a volunteer logs into their account. So again, you can choose volunteers, staff, or both. And this is, of course, something that you might use seasonally, and you might switch it out depending on what things are happening or what needs you have. So this is kind of the main format for pop-up messaging. It's called System Information Message. And again, this is in the system configuration under Page Content. There are two other kind of pseudo pop-up messages that are a little bit more automated. One is actually right here as well, and it's the birthday banner. If you would like to, you can have a banner appear when it is someone's birthday. If you're tracking birth date, obviously this is relevant in that scenario, then you can have this pop up when it is someone's birthday if they happen to log into their account, or use the sign-in console. They'll see a banner like this. This banner, you can pick what icon you want to use, and then you can also change the greeting, which is that kind of header, and then the message. Both of these can use that first name variable. So if you want this to actually say their name when they log in, you can have it do that as well. So again, this shows up when they log into their account or when they use the sign-in console and it is their birthday. And then the last is relatively similar, and that would be awards. If you have created any awards, we're not going to get into all of the scheme here. We do have a webinar on awards as a whole. But basically, if you've created an award and a volunteer reaches that metric, they will have a banner pop up again, either when they log into their account as a volunteer or if they're using the sign-in console. So they'll see a banner like this, and this will persist until they either click on it or close it, or go directly to viewing their award history. If they click on the award, it takes them to their award history. They're basically acknowledging that they've seen it. So you may not think of it as a communication tool, but I think it is a pretty powerful tool to be able to communicate to your volunteers, hey, here are the milestones you have reached. Again, we have an entire webinar on using awards and how to do a volunteer appreciation. So if you want to learn more about that, I would encourage you to go there. But this can also be a helpful communication tool in terms of retaining and keeping your volunteers. All right. Well, that was a lot of information that we ran through in terms of different methods for communicating with volunteers using static messaging like your page content sections, using manual messages like emailing and texting, or setting up some of that pop-up messaging. And then also by having some automated messages like confirmation emails, reminder emails, and the like set up both for your volunteers and for your staff. As you're engaging the platform, if you have further questions, your best resources are, of course, our customer support team. If you click on this Need Help button when you are logged in, it says, how can we help? You can type in a question or a topic through here. We looked at the SMS configuration document. This shows all of our articles. There's a lot of good information in here, and you can always pop those out if you want to view a larger version of that. But regardless what you've searched by, you can always click on Contact Us and submit a ticket to our customer support team. I'd encourage you to utilize that. Then the other major resource is all of our other previously recorded webinars. I alluded to a couple here today, like we talked about volunteer appreciation. You could go and review the webinar on that subject, or on recruiting, or on awards, or sending emails and different things like that. So if you have further questions, again, please make sure to loop us in and let us know. We are happy to help you and answer those questions. But that will do it for our time here today. Of course, we are grateful that you joined us and that you asked questions throughout. As you do have more questions and as things come up, please let us know. And we look forward to seeing you in the next webinar.